It must be Saturday. Here am I. Where are you? I sometimes wonder whether there'll be a Saturday when I don't have anything to say, but actually, I don't know whether I have anything to say anyway until I usually do, though, don't I? But let's just have a little bit of silence and see where we go. I've got quite a few things going through my head this week. I'm reading a book by Michael Singer. You may have heard of him from the Oprah uh, Winfrey Super Soul Sunday. He wrote a book, The Untethered Soul, and he's revised it with what's called the Living Untethered. So that book's in me. One of the things that he talks about is that everything that we see comes from inside rather than outside. It can be hard to get your head around that, but what he's saying is that everything that we see and experience is coming through our brains, our senses, which makes you wonder what are you seeing. And I had an example of this. Of course, most people will from driving. So you see someone drive in a particular way, and the seeing of it is fine. But then there's another thing comes in and says he or she just cut you up, and then it brings with it an emotion. Oh, well, why did they do that and stuff? What's the point of me saying that? Well, I was just thinking that if you turned off the emotional sense and just saw, you would just see, and you probably wouldn't have an emotional reaction, but the emotion comes in with what's seen and gives a story to it. And I suppose we do that all the time. We see something and we give a story to it, and that's probably based on something to do with our past experience. So what story we give to it may not help us. Even if the person is cutting us up, that's not a good story to give ourselves, because that's their problem and not ours. So that Michael Singer's looking at how to keep ourselves untethered, free, I guess. There's a small library in St Albans Cathedral that I go to, maybe once a month or maybe twice a month. It's only open at certain times, and I've been looking at a book by a guy called Robert Altar. He translated the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, into an English translation that he feels is fitting, because he does feel that I think Robert Alter is probably Jewish. He does feel a lot of the English translations lose or poor translations of the Hebrew. So it's quite an interesting read. So one of the things that he talked about today, so I'm at the start. I've been at the start for a while. It takes me a while to get through things, as you probably know. He talks about the first creation story in Genesis 1, and then the second creation story in Genesis 2. And if you look into this, this is pretty well known that there's two accounts of creation. It's interesting as well, I keep using that word interesting, that he talks about books being different in those days to now. Obviously, they weren't books, they were papyrus, as in scrolls. So they weren't necessarily written with chapter after chapter, but became, I suppose, like that with further editing. So there may have been two versions of the creation story that then find their way into chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Genesis. Anyway, one of the points he makes is that in Genesis chapter 1, we have Elohim, which I think is the Hebrew for... No, Adonai is the Hebrew, I think, for Lord. Somebody can tell me what Elohim means. Anyway, chapter 1 has got Elohim, but he says chapter 2 has got what we would say Yahweh Elohim, and that's Yahweh YWH. Oh, I've forgotten the abbreviations. Because again, it would appear that in Hebrew, certainly biblical Hebrew, there were no vowels, that it was consonants. Again, somebody may put me right, I'm no expert. And what he does is compare the image of God in chapter 1, which is a God who speaks, let there be light, let there be water, let the water separate from the earth. Like a voice speaking, a commanding voice, which probably fits with the image that Blake created of God. You know, that image of God, naked God with a beard and the earth. And I think he's pointing down. This image that you often hear people talking about, God being an old man with a beard sitting on top of things. Of course, we have to think when we say God is a generic term for gods, I guess. So what God are we talking about? And I think that's what I'm going on about, is our images of God. So in chapter 2, this Yahweh Elohim is a God who is more personal. So he creates Eve from Adam, and he's involved, and Altor talks about him being like a potter, which is referenced again, I think it's in Jeremiah, about the potter and the wheel. So here in these 2 chapters we have God that's aloof, speaking, let there be light, like a director. And then in chapter 2 we have God who is like a potter, who's involved and taken from the earth and making something. Which one do you prefer? I think the one I prefer is the personal one, the potter. The idea that God is with us, which I guess is another name for God is Emmanuel, God with us. The notion that God, for everything that God might be, that God can take on this personal form that I as a human can relate to. So we all have many different views about who God is and what God is, and I would just ask you to think about, where does that come from and what's that based on, and is it true? Of course, some people may say to me, well, there is no God anyway, so nothing's true. I have to accept that. I've shut myself up in saying that. What do I say to that? I say that I relate to life. Life inhabits me. And even if I bring the notion of God down to life, what's our relationship to life? I mean, you may not need to animate it. You may not need to, what's that great word they use? Anthropomorphize, which is make God human. But whatever we do, well, I accept. For me, it's more exciting, more imaginative when we interact with life in a personal way. And for some of us, we may see that as God. For others, we may not. But whatever I do think, for me anyway, and of course anything's only speaking for myself, is that it makes for a better life. How I interact with life itself. So I suppose bottom line, seeing life as sacred and not just life. I mean, it is just life, but I don't want to take it for granted. I want to appreciate it, and I want to live it to the full. And if I swing in Jesus to that, to keep an old friend Morty happy, he likes me to mention Jesus. Of course, he would never have been known as Jesus. His name, I think, in the Aramaic would have been Yeshua. That's Eashoa. Well, that's the English way of pronouncing it. It's probably not that in Aramaic. So even our ideas of Jesus are influenced by history and where we are in the world. Anyway, Jesus said, I've come that you might know life, and life to all its fullness. Is that John 10:10? I'm not sure. I'm not very good at memory verses, but it might be one of them. And I was also thinking about that today, that, if anything, Jesus reminded us that life is sacred, and how we can get the best from it. Have I gone on for 10 minutes? Nearly 11. So, yeah, this man's never short of words. Okay, I'll leave it there. Take care.